Eggs, bacon, toast with real butter, a tall glass of whole milk. If that sounds like a heart attack on a plate to modern ears, you're not wrong to raise an eyebrow. But here's the strange part. The generation that ate this way, every single morning without fail, also happened to be leaner, more active, and less prone to obesity than we are today. So either everything we think we know about a healthy breakfast is completely wrong, or there's something else going on underneath all of it. Today we're finding out exactly what your grandparents actually ate every morning, and more importantly, why it worked so well for them. Picture a weekday morning in a typical American household in the mid-1950s. Someone was already awake well before sunrise, usually the mother of the household, sometimes the father too, especially if he worked an early factory shift. And breakfast was never an afterthought squeezed in around everything else. It was the first real event of the day, made from scratch, almost every single morning, in nearly every kitchen across the country, rich and poor alike. There was no protein bar grabbed on the way out the door, no quick coffee shop stop, no skipping breakfast entirely to save a few minutes. And there was certainly no eating in the car on the way to work. Families sat down together at a real table, often before anyone left the house for work or school, and ate a full, warm, home-cooked meal before doing anything else that day. It wasn't seen as indulgent, old-fashioned, or a luxury at the time. It was simply what breakfast meant. A fixed, expected part of the day that nobody questioned. Even households with very little money still made a point of getting a real, cooked meal on the table before anyone walked out the door, because a full stomach was considered a basic requirement for the day ahead. Not a nice to have. So what did that plate actually look like, in real detail? Eggs were the backbone of it. Fried, scrambled, or soft-boiled, usually 2 per person, cooked simply in butter or bacon fat. Bacon or breakfast sausage showed up most mornings as well, prepared plainly, without much seasoning beyond salt and pepper, straight from the local butcher rather than a factory package. Toast was almost always on the table too, made from real, dense bread, spread generously with real butter, sometimes topped with homemade jam if the family had put up preserves the summer before. Oatmeal and other hot cereals were common as well, especially through the colder months or in households watching their grocery budget more closely, usually cooked slowly on the stovetop in a saucepan rather than made instantly in a packet. And nearly every glass at that table was filled with whole milk, not skim, not a plant-based alternative, just full-fat milk, often delivered fresh to the doorstep that same morning. None of this food was labeled clean eating, protein forward, or health food of any kind. It was simply what breakfast was, built from a short list of real, recognizable ingredients that hadn't been processed into anything else. Here's the part that really explains why this worked so well for them, and why the exact same plate might not work quite the same way for us today. This generation had genuinely physically demanding days ahead of them, almost without exception. Farm work, factory shifts on their feet for 8 or 10 hours, walking to school or walking to work, standing jobs behind a counter, physical chores waiting at home. The average day back then burned significantly more calories through simple, ordinary movement than the average day does now. A large, protein and fat-heavy breakfast made complete sense as fuel for that kind of morning. It kept people genuinely full and steady all the way until midday, without needing to snack at all, because there was real, sustained physical work ahead of them that would put that energy to use. This was never a diet plan, and nobody thought of it that way. It was simply food matched to the actual physical demands of daily life. And that match, more than any single ingredient on the plate, is the real reason it worked. There's another piece of this that's easy to overlook entirely. Breakfast was eaten at a set, predictable time, sitting down at a table, and then, this is the important part, nobody ate again until lunch. There was no mid-morning snack, no pastry grabbed at 10 a.m., no grazing steadily throughout the morning between meetings or errands. Meals had clear, firm boundaries. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the stretches of time in between were simply time spent without eating anything at all. This kind of structure meant the body had long, predictable windows to actually use up the energy from the last meal before the next one ever arrived. It sounds like a small detail, but it mattered enormously. A big breakfast followed by hours of steady physical activity, and zero snacking is a genuinely different pattern than a big breakfast followed by sitting at a desk all morning while grazing on something every hour or two, which is a lot closer to how many of us eat today, even when we're trying hard to eat healthy foods. So if this kind of breakfast worked so well for so long, what actually changed? A handful of things happened slowly and quietly across the following few decades. The first was marketing, starting in the 1950s and accelerating hard through the 60s and 70s. Sugary breakfast cereals were aggressively marketed directly at children through cartoon mascots and Saturday morning television commercials, gradually turning breakfast from a home-cooked, sit-down meal into a bowl of brightly colored, sugar-coated cereal poured straight out of a box. The second was time. As more households had both parents working outside the home, and commutes grew longer and longer, the slow, unhurried cooked breakfast became an early casualty of a genuinely busier morning schedule. Convenience quietly won out over the stovetop, and understandably so, because nobody was choosing worse food on purpose. They were choosing what actually fit into a faster-moving life. And the third change was, in many ways, the biggest one. The physical demands of an average day shrank dramatically over those same decades, while breakfast, when people ate it at all anymore, often got replaced by something quick, heavily processed, and sugar-heavy. That's about the worst possible combination because the food itself now provides a fast spike and crash of energy, and there's far less physical activity built around it to actually use that energy up anyway. By the 1980s and 90s, an entirely new category had appeared on top of all this. Breakfast skipped altogether. Rushed mornings, longer commutes, and a growing belief that skipping a meal was a simple way to cut calories all pushed breakfast further down the priority list for millions of people. What used to be the most reliably eaten meal of the day slowly became the most optional one, often replaced by nothing more than a cup of coffee on the way out the door. None of this means you need to fry bacon in a cast iron pan every single morning or walk 5 miles to work to eat a genuinely healthy breakfast. The real lesson here isn't the exact menu. It's the underlying pattern hiding underneath it. A real breakfast, built around actual protein and fat, rather than mostly sugar, tends to keep people fuller and steadier through the whole morning than a bowl of sweetened cereal or a sugary coffee drink ever realistically will. Eating at a consistent time, sitting down instead of eating on the move, and giving yourself a genuine stretch of hours before the next meal instead of snacking constantly in between, these are the exact parts of the old pattern that still hold up perfectly well today, no farm work or factory shift required. The specific food on the plate was never really the whole story here. It was the quiet structure built around it that did most of the actual work. And that structure is something anyone can rebuild in any decade. What did breakfast actually look like in your house growing up? And is it anything close to what you eat now? Tell us in the comments below. We genuinely love hearing how it's changed, from household to household, and from generation to generation. And if you're enjoying this series on how earlier generations really lived and what we can still learn from it, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.